Good morning and welcome to the New Media Show. My name is Todd Cochran, and of course I got my co-host, Mr. Rob Greenlee, with me this morning. Rob, little under the weather, huh?
Yeah, I've been battling the flu, like I'm sure there's a lot of people in listening to this or watching this that has been doing the same, because I know a lot of people that are struggling with it right now, but I'm at the tail end, so it's good.
So the question is, did you get a flu shot?
I did not. And I don't think it would have helped. So.
I did, and I've been good so far, so knock on wood.
Yeah, there you go.
Well,
but it's good to be here, Todd.
Well, good. I'm glad you're here, and on the rebound, I guess, for a better word, for getting healthy. And we got a great guest today to talk about the new media space, Mr. Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity podcast. Good morning, Daniel. How are you?
Good morning, Todd and Rob. I'm very well. I'm really excited to talk with you guys. We could make this a 4-hour episode, I'm sure.
Yes, we could.
Yeah, and I was, just before we started the show, I was mentioning that, man, things are on fire right now from a new podcaster, new podcasters launching shows, and I'm getting calls from people who've been in podcasting space for years that are like, okay, we need to do something, and I can tell just by our tech forums, and Angelo actually said we're going to have to bring some more people on because the volume of people needing help and support, and I kind of alluded to it last week a little bit, is just is exploding. But that being said, if you're in the Columbus area, I'm hiring. I got 2 job positions. Email me and we'll get you the links to those. But I digress, and hope everyone else is doing good out there. So, Rob, I know you are kind of been feeling out the job space a little bit, and you're actually, I know you're still, I guess for a better word, working as a contractor for Podcast One. But what are before we, really get in deep here with Daniel this morning, what are you hearing in the space that you can talk about? Anything?
Well, I can just say that, from what I'm hearing, there's a lot of large players that are going to be adding support for on-demand audio, and I think that's the common theme. And I think there's a lot of formerly streaming radio platforms, streaming music, streaming talk, that are going to be fully embracing the whole podcast phenomenon, like they probably should have been for years. But I think all of a sudden it's just everybody on the radio side is jumping into the space, and that includes streaming radio. The whole download piece is really the only thing that's different, right? But I think it's also adding that content, and I think that the really big question is, what's going to be the depth of that offering? Is it going to include, a couple 100,000 shows, or is it going to be a limited shows, a bunch of big shows? I'm out there encouraging these companies to support a wide selection of shows that cover a lot of different topics and a lot of different genres, because that's the power of podcasting. It's not just big shows, because that's more of a paradigm of broadcast radio, though I think that those folks tend to lean that direction, as they want the big hits, right? But I think what podcasting is all about is experts in their fields talking about things with passion. And I think there's a lot of areas that podcasting has that are better than radio, and I think that's what needs to be embraced. So I just feel that there's a lot of new companies moving into the space. One example is there was a rumor that Facebook may be wanting to buy Spotify, and a few months ago there was some confirmed rumors that Spotify was going to add a podcast area. So that could mean that Facebook could have podcasting. So you start looking at these big companies, and who knows, maybe at some point Google will acquire one of these podcasting platforms. I'm just speculating on that, but you can kind of see how this space has a momentum now, that is new. I think that the media hype that's been happening around podcasting has propelled it to a new level of perception, and I think that is is piquing people's desire to support it, and I think that's always a good thing.
Well, Daniel, you're probably working on, supporting the podcaster side a lot. What are you seeing on your side from for excitement in the space and new shows, and what's your experience been over the past couple of months?
Yeah, I see a lot of new people getting in on this space because of the whatever we want to label this, that podcasts are getting popular again, that people are jumping in again. But what I especially see is people trying to make podcasting more accessible. And I think we all have some mixed feelings about this because we're kind of like the old fogies of podcasting, the old geezers who say, you must do your RSS feed in this way, you must have this, you must do it with WordPress or do these certain things, you must have media hosting on this certain kind of platform or something. And some of these new platforms coming out are making it more accessible so that you don't have to focus so much on the technology, but more focus on creating the content. I think that is a great direction for the industry to go. Yeah. Enabling people to put out great content and doing it well while still owning their audience in a way. Yeah. But it's a little bit of a conflict then because of the great foundations we already have in place of this is a great way to build your platform with like your own WordPress site, your own domain, all of that. So it's a little bit of give and take on both sides. And I think it's exciting though to see the challenge then to the rest of us that when we see someone new come into the space with a new technology to then look at that and think, that's a great idea. How could we implement something similar or come up with an even better idea?
Yeah.
I think the challenge though is that, it's people have been creating on the audio on the internet since the internet was really, founded and it's been available. And really the only thing that makes podcasting special in that regard is the delivery mechanism. Now, we know that a lot of people are still, basically going to websites, but the majority, the high majority of folks are still actually doing, via a download and taking that content with them. And I'm sure that'll shift over time, and we've already seen a little bit of a shift. But the simple fact that the audience members are still consuming largely the same way. Now, these platforms come out with great tools where I can stream it. It's really no different than any other live streaming platform or on-demand streaming platform. So from that aspect, really the play is not much different. It's just that maybe they have a popular app, and so it's more accessibility because maybe more people have that app loaded. Exposure is always good, but I think in the end, if the podcaster's smart and building his brand, he's going to drive them back to, their .com and their subscription links so they get subscribed externally so that you're not dependent upon that third-party platform to be your sole source of listeners. And I would be surprised if a lot of shows have huge success on those platforms. I really do. It's hard to break out. And, that when you're in a directory of 10,000 or 40,000 or 200,000, iTunes is even the same thing. How do you get found?
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking more of tools like Adello, for example, that came out and had a lot of hype for many different reasons. But something that Adello does, yes, it does a lot of stuff that you can do with other things like SpeakPipe and plugins for WordPress and all of this, but something really cool that I thought was truly a new idea or innovative in the podcasting space is A/B testing with your podcast, where you're doing some kind of split test where half of your listeners get this episode, half of your listeners get that episode, and then you have some kind of different call to action within that content, and then you can see which one actually performs better, and that can come through on your website, through the podcast media that they receive. I thought, wow, that's a really cool idea, split testing with your podcast call to actions. That's brilliant. And it's that kind of thing that Adello can integrate with your own website, or you can use their website. But that kind of thing is where I think they're challenging the space and coming up with some new ideas. Do I fully support it? No. I still believe in the run your own WordPress site, use PowerPress, generate your own feed that way, get some great media hosting. That's what I still believe in. But I applaud these new players in the space coming up with new ideas to build your own platform.
A/B testing, though, what is that going to appeal to? Half of 1% of podcasters that have time to create a second episode? That to me is the only question I have, is they're bringing traditional entrepreneur / web hosting techniques into the podcasting space. And I don't know if that's going to completely resonate with most podcasters. I don't have time to make 2 shows. I don't know, but it's a different, it's obviously something unique, but by usability of it, I don't know. I'm doubtful personally.
It could be something where you see, what if we put this segment first and then this segment later, and just change the order of the exact same segments? Does that increase or decrease how many people download or listen to that complete episode? And that goes back to, what stats platform are you actually using that can track that kind of thing?
Right. Rob, what do you think, on that A/B testing? Would you use it?
I think that there's probably some advantages to using that to maybe test your format and test. I think that the metrics and the user metrics that can be gotten now, like how far people are listening into the show and what's the typical duration and things. I think those can be used to create more engaging content. So if you know that your audience is only listening in to a minute or something like that, then maybe you need to do something within that minute to get people to go to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think testing to improve your content, I think is a great use for that. And I think one other piece here is that as these streaming music platforms get more involved in podcasting, we're going to be faced with kind of the same dilemmas that we have faced with Stitcher, and that's those platforms hosting your content.
Right.
Because a lot of those platforms use the HLS streaming technology. That would mean that those platforms are going to be hosting your media files. And I think that's a challenge, unless those platforms are willing to just pull it as a download in a progressive download playback scenario, which they could do, and they may do that. We're going to have to see. I'm going to definitely, if I talk to any of those folks, I'm going to talk to them to definitely support the progressive download playback.
I think
we'll see.
And that goes back to the same problem we've had with all these other platforms. And as I stated in an earlier show, the race is on for content in a big way. Everyone, you get, when folks are going to New Media Expo and going to around with the NAB, they're going to hear that a lot. People looking for content. So it's a lot of it's a content play, and so this is going to be interesting. There is going to be some interesting battles, I'm sure, that are going to develop over this.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
Definitely.
Especially if someone says, "No, I don't want my show on your platform because you're re-encoding an already encoded file, and you're splitting it up and dropping ads in, or overplaying ads, or stopping ads or stopping the playback and playing ads."
Or, here's something that I ran into just recently with Stitcher is I have my own little network, Noodle Mix Network, and 3 of our shows have been prominently featured recently on Stitcher: The Audacity to Podcast, Beyond the To-Do List, and The Productive Woman, where they take a headline from the episode, maybe 2 or 3 minutes of the episode, and put that in their Stitcher headlines. And we're seeing huge downloads then from Stitcher from that. And yes, that's just the being featured, that spike that people are just listening to those 2 or 3 minutes of the headline. But I am seeing some residual effects from that, of people sticking around and staying subscribed. Our average numbers are higher after being featured than before. And that's where, Stitcher has the permission, because of their terms, they have that permission to cut it up and use just a little headline like that. But I'm thinking, it's unfortunate that you're not giving all of my content, but you're giving my content a lot more attention than I would have received if you didn't cut it up and use a headline.
Yeah, I think where the objection comes from, and I think it's the shows that are really highly focused on making money and generating revenue from advertising, is that Stitcher is taking shows and placing ads against them, and not sharing revenue. So I think that's an issue for just a small number of shows. It's not an issue for most podcasters, but I think that's another point of conflict that's going to happen in the space, and it's going to come from more and more places as the scale of podcasting grows. Is that how are these? And it actually goes back to an email from a listener, Michael Johnson.
Yeah.
Sent us an email here trying to get some clarity on why we've been talking about this issue of content and distribution and why that there's going to be a conflict there. And that really cuts to the heart of it is that a lot of these platforms, and Stitcher is a classic example of that, is that they really have no way to make money. I mean, there's no monetization models that they've built in that actually really work. I mean, running ads against shows that they don't have rights to sell advertising against is a failed model. It's not going to work in the long run. And I think there needs to be other things. And as I think about the space, and Daniel, I think you'll probably, from a big picture, you'll probably agree, but a platform like Spreaker may be a better model for what's coming in the future. Is a platform that has multiple revenue streams that offers a complete suite of hosting and tools to make your podcast. It's more like what happened with a YouTube. It just made it easy for people to create content. They can just focus on the content and not have to focus on the technology so much. And I think Spreaker is a really good example of that. And I think a lot of folks in the podcasting space really like what Spreaker is doing. But there's a lot of folks in the podcasting space that don't like what Stitcher is doing. And I think that is a classic kind of conflict, I think, in what's happening in the space is how do these distribution platforms make money? And I think that may be a sign of where the future is. I don't know. So what do you guys think?
Well, I think there's 25 different ways to cut things up, and I think it depends on what your end objective goals are.
Yeah.
And if you're just a show, you're only doing a show, you don't have any other thing else going on, probably being on a sole source site is going to be okay for you. But I think that most content creators are going to very quickly figure out that they have to diversify, and their content alone isn't going to carry them. Sadly, a lot of them don't realize that until it's too late. But it's hard work keeping and building and keeping an audience over a long period of time, and keeping the content fresh and keeping them a reason to come back, episode after episode. So you can't always count on discovery of new listeners to basically keep the build-up going on from the ones you're dropping on the backside. So key is just to keep those that are on the backside from dropping off.
Yeah, and that's something I realized when I got into this space professionally is when I launched the Audacity to Podcast in 2010, I realized this was the missing piece in my desire to become an entrepreneur. Not that I would make money directly from the podcast, like with sponsorships, because I knew a podcast about podcasting is pretty niche. So I'm not going to make lots of money from that. But I could make money off of the business side of that, of promoting products and services that I create or that I'm affiliate for. And only in the last year have I actually been able to take action on some of that, like with launching mypodcastreviews.com or launching my SEO for Podcasters training, where I'm seeing that the podcast itself, the content itself, is promoting the brand. It's helping and entertaining in some way for people out there, but then it's supporting something else that I do.
But I think in most cases, Daniel, very few podcasters do that. I think most podcasters podcast, and that's it.
Yeah.
There's a few business podcasts that kind of, they sell them versus their show, which is understandable.
That's why, actually, I just had a couple episodes recently talking about monetization models, and one of them was ideas for creating a product for your podcast. Even if you're doing a hobby podcast, often people still want to represent. They want something with your logo on it. They want to feel like they belong. So maybe it's you sell t-shirts, or maybe if you have a video game podcast, you make some tutorial on how to beat this video game, something like that people would love to have. And you've got basically a profitable business model then after that.
Yep. And another thing, too, is going to happen, Rob, that we're going to find in Daniel, is that, and we run into this all the time, is I get a call from someone and they want to do a deal. And then I'm like, well, what's the commission rate going to be? And, they insult you at this, like, well, we'll pay you 5%. And I'm like, no, if I'm going to be promoting your product or service, and you want me to sell a $39.95 product and you're expecting me to do that for 5%, that's not enough. So what ends up happening is I walk away from a lot of deals because there's just not enough meat on the vine for the content creators. In the end, I have to keep the content creators happy. If the content creators aren't happy, then they're not going to create content. They're going to look for business elsewhere. So, so many of these deals these days it's really insulting on, the business models people are applying, and they want you to do a lot for almost nothing.
Yeah.
And it's just like sooner they realize that we can be their best friend, the sooner that they're going to have a successful product.
And that's something that I've tried to keep in mind, like with my own affiliate programs that I'm starting for the products and services I offer, is to make it actually worth it to people.
Yep.
And when I'm dealing with my own network of podcasts, there are certain deals that I see come through where, it's a CPA model. You get paid based on how many people take action. And is this really likely that your audience will take action on this deal that you're promoting? If yes, then maybe we could work through this. If no, then let's think of something else.
In that email that we got, Rob, Mike had asked, I was listening with great interest when you and Todd were discussing podcasters that have audience numbers of 3,000 or less. Would there be advertising opportunities for them? And at least from our perspective, I always say yes. The challenge that we run into, and as of late, what we've seen is that many of the media buyers have had their eyeballs on the big shows, and you started out with everyone was looking at all the shows, and then now they're looking at the big shows, starting to see some of the trickle down now. Again, finally, people are coming back and they're figuring out, I have to wait 9 months to get into show ABC inventory, and I want to be in this space now. What do I do? So, Mike, your answer is yes, but the key is you have to make your show very presentable. You have to have a good website. You need to have your own brand. You need to have, full social, utilization and being out there and doing it the right way. Basically promoting without, I guess for a better word, spamming, and at the same time can show that you have an engaged audience. An engaged audience would be, some of the things we look for is comments on your blog post, and then that goes back to, okay, how well are your blog show notes written? There's a whole bunch of things we look at. We have a grading sheet that we go and look at a show and kind of assign a score to the site, and then the advertisers themselves would come over and look and sample the content. And an example, I completely blew it on my last show. In the intro was I just totally screwed it up. And I'm thinking to myself, man, if some advertiser comes in and listens to this show, they're just going to hit stop. So, that first 2 or 3 minutes of your show is pretty important.
Yeah, I agree. The first probably the first minute of your show is most important to get people hooked in there. I know I did with my show for years. I did teasers at the beginning of my show. I said, this is what's coming up in this show. These are the topics that we're going to talk about. I mean, it's a long-standing technique for broadcast radio as well. is that, you have to tease your audience into why they need to
Yep.
keep listening. Yeah.
And he's goes back and talking about his audience metrics having higher than average income. You might be surprised, Mike, but the average income level of podcasters across the board are higher. It trends,
Yeah.
in the range that you said in the email. But what really ends up happening, and what the key is Mike, is engagement. Being able to engage the audience to do what you ask them to do. And, you might want to run a test, and sell some T-shirts or a mug or something like that, or have a little something where you can test the engagement of your audience. And then if it doesn't work, figure out, okay, what do I need to do to change to engage the audience? And that might be even just a simple thing as, hey, send me an email on this topic and tell me what you think and see how many responses you get. And then you can pretty much, you'll be able to tell where your engagement level is. But Daniel, I know there was a few things you wanted to talk about today. Specifically, you wanted to focus a little bit talk about SEO, I think was one of the things you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, well, big props to you and Angelo for PowerPress 6.0. I'm really excited with the new SEO features that it has, and excited that some of them are ones that I've requested in there. And that's an awesome thing that I think podcasters really need to take advantage of. Search engine optimization isn't just about getting lucky and being found randomly, but it's about making your content so that it can be found. And SEO can really help you to podcast better. And that's something I've got this course now that I thought would initially be just 3 hours. It's 8 hours of training on SEO for podcasters on my website. And what I talk about is how much this stuff comes back to giving your content better. Like Rob was saying, giving those teasers up at the beginning so people know how to, or what to expect is coming in the episodes. And when you put that in writing, that's higher quality content for Google as well. And for people just browsing your site, they see that teaser, they consume it. And in SEO, with iTunes especially for podcasts, it's been a changing space, really, because iTunes keeps changing things here and there. Sometimes they're quick to change something. Sometimes it takes them a long time. But the only two pieces of text that matter for SEO in iTunes are your title tags for your overall show and your individual episodes, and your author tags for your overall show and your individual episodes. That's it. That's all that iTunes desktop will search.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think when people look at their descriptions and they start spamming their descriptions with all of these keywords and guests that they've interviewed, that's not helping your SEO. Well, your search engine optimization, it can help your human optimization where you're describing people, describing to them what value they'll receive by subscribing to this content, what content to expect. That's the human factor, which I think is far more important than the machine factor of optimizing for search engines. So like with PowerPress 6.0, that new ability to give a podcast episode a slightly different title to appear in iTunes and podcast apps than what appears on the website, that's huge and wonderful for this space.
I'm just wondering at what point will we start seeing some results of people doing that. That's what I'm really interested in is, okay, we've implemented this tool. It takes you have to have a little extra effort. It's going to take you a few more minutes to post your show because you're going to have to, fill out a couple additional fields to make that, make it work. What I'm curious in is, okay, I want to see some measured results. And, this could come strictly from web traffic and from, Google response searches. But sadly, Google's blocking now the search results that are basically driving people to your website. You kind of have to guess. So you have to rely on Bing and the other sites, look at the search terms that people are using on those sites. That's a much lower percentage, obviously. But what do you think so far from your usage of it? Are you seeing some deltas? Are you breaking out places you didn't before?
I haven't fully leveraged it yet, but I do see the huge potential with it. Like, for example, I have a podcast about the TV show Once Upon a Time. And the title of that podcast is Once Upon a Time Podcast. So that's in the title. It has those keywords, Once Upon a Time Podcast, in the title of the overall show. So PowerPress 6 allows me to add the title of the overall show to every episode title, so I can append it to the end, not the beginning. Don't ever do that. But I can put the title of the overall show at the end of every single episode. So the beginning of the episode title can be unique, but then the end of it is the title of the overall show. And because my overall show title has great keywords in it, Once Upon a Time Podcast, those are my target keywords, that means then that every episode is contributing that much more to my overall findability for if someone enters Once Upon a Time or Once Upon a Time Podcast into a podcast search engine like iTunes or any other podcast apps out there.
And, we took quite a bit of time really implementing that and trying to figure out best practices and talking with, not only iTunes, but other folks in the space. And I think we've done a good job there. I'll be curious to see how many people are using it and their success rate at some point. So, when you get some tangible results and, some people are saying, well, are you downplaying your system? No, I'm just saying we want to know too how effective it's being. And if it is,
the most measurable results are really going to be your website, because iTunes doesn't provide stats for most podcasters. Right. Some podcasters do get stats from iTunes. They're special. But what you can look for are, if you're using your podcast media stats like from Blueberry, is try to look for those patterns to see, are you getting more downloads now? What's your momentum level? Is it going up over time, or is it increasing in how fast it's going up?
And that's going to be hard. It's really going to, because, a single episode could all of a sudden resonate and you can get this huge flurry of traffic, and it can be a one-off almost. So it is going to be difficult to really see that over time. Rob, this, the SEO thing is, let's be frank, there's a SEO experts are dime a dozen in the website space, and be honest with you, most of them you can't trust. It is a huge black hat business, and they claim they're going to give you all kinds of stuff. So I want to be clear that what we have done is the ability to make some changes that we know will be effective in certain search engines, but we're not, again, I don't want to be even associated with a black hat type process. We're just trying to give a little tweak on a small thing you can do, and it's not over a huge strategy, but it's just another thing, I guess for better words, it's the hammer in your toolbox, or it's the screwdriver. It's one tool of many.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with what you did. I think it's a smart technique. I spent many years in the early .com days being a SEO expert myself, so things have changed in that area.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big reasons I'm no longer an SEO expert, is because it's impossible to game any of these search engines anymore. So you have to play things very kind of upfront. I think you can try and game them, but by now they've basically figured out all of the gaming techniques and blocked them all. So I think you have to be upfront and legitimate about what you're doing, and just deliver natural keywords that are important and relatable to the content. And I think as long as you're doing that, I don't think any of the search engines are going to penalize you or have any issue with what you're doing. I just think you're giving them the information that they need to better index your content.
And I think
it can also make your content a bit more accessible too. Like on your website, if you're blogging and posting podcast episodes at the same time, you might want to distinguish a podcast episode by using the word podcast episode number in your title for that post on your website. But that's completely unnecessary in iTunes, because it's obvious it's a podcast. It doesn't need to say podcast on it. Right. So that's where you could use the SEO tools to give yourself a just slightly different title for iTunes and make it more accessible than to humans.
And, and I'll be honest with you, that my SEO strategy for over the years is just write good content and write good show notes. And I learned some things that you shouldn't do. I should show you guys this is how I got hammered. They made a change a couple of years ago. Let me bring up my site. And it hurt me. It hurt me pretty bad. And then I I figured it out. So, for example, now let's see if I can. You guys have been busy putting up CES content. Okay, so let me bring this up. So here's the last post. This is my show that was done on Thursday. And of course, at the beginning, there's not a lot of data there. It's, shows GNC 1008 and a little bit of a title, and then there's a read more button. And what we did is we built a plugin that basically we added to our site. Now, if you look, if Google search engine comes to my website and indexes this, if we hadn't implemented what we did, all these links down the side, they would think, man, this guy's just doing a link farm.
Yeah.
I have very short links here. FCC broadband definition. Comcast insults customers. 18 billion profit. It's all titles to articles that I covered during my show, and it links to, whatever site it's. You've got Tech Dirt, Gizmodo, blah 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 blah. Well, what we did was Google hammered me because for years I've done just like this with basically those were follow links before, and Angelo, after I got hammered from a search engine perspective on, basically they downgraded me because I had what appeared to be a link farm. I moved my show notes off the website for about a year, and then we got to talking about it, and we built a plugin, and it's available on the App Store, that anything below the more line, and it's a thing that you use within WordPress itself, these all now have no follow links. So if you look at the actual link, there's a no follow tag in there. So basically what Google does is they ignore this. They ignore these links. So the only thing that they look at, and all my sponsor stuff has no follow links too, but really the only thing they look at is the top part. That's what gets indexed now. And so it was it took me about 6 months to recover that traffic until we applied that across the entire site and basically cleaned it up. And the bad thing was I got associated with people that were doing bad stuff, and I was actually trying to do something good with my show notes, which ended up getting me in trouble. So if you're following my model on how to do show notes, and which probably is not the best SEO strategy. If it was great SEO strategy, you would have very extensive write-ups on each of those links, but I don't have time to do that. You have to put a no follow on that URL. And if anyone doesn't understand what I'm talking about, just Google no follow, and you'll get all the information you need how to make that happen. But now because my site is not only podcast content, it's because it's, we've got blogging content on here too. And I get 20, 25,000 hits a day just driven by Google. And it might bring us into another topic that's been actually discussed quite a bit lately in the Facebook forums, is this argument about RSS and having an RSS feed on your website. And it just, I've been beating this drum for years, and
yeah, you have. Yeah.
And finally, I'm starting to get some other support from some other,
It seems so obvious, right? I mean, it's been
people fight it.
Yeah.
They fight it. Why? Why do I have to put that on there?
Yeah. I mean, it seems so obvious that that's the smart thing to do. I mean, there's a lot of podcatchers out there that, people will cut and paste that feed into. I think that it's a dream for us to think that, eventually people won't do that, but that's not reality. People do it every day.
And especially on the Android side, sometimes if you have a certain app installed, it will recognize an RSS feed in the browser and will then offer to subscribe you to that feed when you click on it on the Android side.
Yeah.
And it's, and another thing too is, and now that's another thing that we can go on and on about the Android folks.
Yeah.
Because, we just finally, we had made, on our new subscribe, and I don't want to focus on PowerPress, that wasn't the function of today's show, but we tried to make it so people could one-click subscribe to Android, and we released it so that the apps that supported it, you could do that. And then all of a sudden the app developer changed something, or either iTunes said you can't use this particular function anymore on Android and shut that developer down. We don't know what happened, but we know now when we had to release 601, we had to make a change to Podcast Republic because you could no longer one-click subscribe to Podcast Republic from a web page. And we're like, why? And we know the answer, and I won't get into what we're going to do to overcome this, but the app developers need to think a little bit beyond what they're doing now and how to make it easier for content creators to subscribe to their shows in Android. Most of them are not thinking really about the subscription process. And it's sad. It should be the number one thing they should be focused on.
They're focused a lot more on, I think, the findability, how to discover new podcasts. And the average person out there doesn't go to a podcast app thinking,
right,
I want to subscribe to a podcast, but I don't know what I should subscribe to.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
No. And it's just, it goes back to what we were just kind of talking about a few seconds ago. Any podcasters that's out there, I encourage you to also make sure you have on your website just standard web analytics. Google provides it for free. I use a couple of services because I like the data that I get from both, and sometimes it's just easier to drill down. The other site that I use is, let's see which if I can remember it, Stat Meter, I think is her stat. Oh gosh,
Stat Counter.
Yeah, Stat Counter, Stat Meter, one of the two. And let me look. Is it Stat Counter? Yeah, I use Stat Counter as a secondary analysis for my website beyond Google Analytics. But the thing that you should look at is bounce rates.
Yeah.
Look at how many people come to your webpage and then leave. And what I find is even on my site, they come to the main page, they're there for 20, 25 seconds, boom, they're out. Most websites get a 5-6 seconds, so that's your kind of your hang time that you have to capture someone. And I hate it when I go to a podcaster's website and it's not. I should be able to see immediately how to subscribe to their show. Their content and how they subscribe to their show should be like the two biggest things that jump out at me, easy, fast. And I know, Daniel, with your plugin that you made, it's absolutely fantastic, beautiful icons and everything. Makes it easier for people to subscribe. As part of the stuff we did with the subscribe to podcast feature now in PowerPress, all of it was basically to get people to start putting that on their main page or any page so that people will know, oh man, here's how I subscribe. Because if it's not there, you've lost that small percentage of time that you had when people bounce out to capture that person.
Yeah.
And
the other thing, go ahead.
So maybe 1 in 1,000 will subscribe, but if it's not on the main page, it's 0 of 1,000.
The other thing that I think it needs to be in that mix of not just your content and your subscription options, but what is your show about? Mm-hmm. There are so many podcast sites I've been to where I look through and I just want to know, what is your show about? What do you actually talk about? There's no about page, but especially on the front page, there's no short paragraph or just even a sentence saying what they cover. I don't know what the Bob and Jim show is about. Is it about you guys? Is it about your pets? Is it about fishing? Right. What is this about? I don't want to consume all of the content before I know what you actually talk about. So just like a simple sentence, like a tagline on your front page or visible on every page that tells people what this content is can really help.
That's actually a good idea because I don't have that on my page. I don't have that little tagline. So maybe that's another idea for the next version of PowerPress, Daniel. Maybe we'll add the ability in that subscribe to podcast bar, or maybe you can even do it on your plugin. Make it so people can write a paragraph that shows up right below maybe it's right below those subscription options.
Yeah, and well, this is what I've done on all of my Noodle Mix Network websites, like theaudacitytopodcast.com. When you go there, the first text you see is award-winning how-to podcast about podcasting to help you launch or improve your own podcast. Right under that are the subscription buttons. I've been playing with having my subscribe by email button most prominent there instead of some of the other buttons. But that then tells people right away, what is this site about? And there's even a picture there that kind of supports, okay, I get the idea this has something to do with podcasting. And then the subscription buttons to take action. Yeah. And that's the way it is across all of our sites that I have on the network. And I think that really helps people to see, am I on the right site? What is this about? And then they can scroll down and see titles and then get an idea instead of just podcast episode 1. They get an idea of what kind of content do I then put out on my site. So it all comes back to your titles, really, and how you're describing yourself.
One thing that I have always done is the content on the website has always been my pull to get people in. And for me, it's always been important to have the content right there, easy to read, right at the beginning. I think, in your site, the way you do it is fine. I think I'm going to experiment with having it in the sidebar. And because I find my hang times on my website are pretty good, so people are going to scroll down. And usually they do, and they basically stay on and look for some content to read, and then they're out. But same thing too is on the individual page landing sites. It's probably important to have that there as well. But if you're trying to monetize, then where do you put that in the sidebar too? Because you're trying to, keep your banners above the fold. So there's a little bit of a trade-off that happens for sure.
Plus, that description needs to be descriptive of what the website's about as well as what the podcast is about, because it may not necessarily be 100% the same.
Yeah, because Google's going to index all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've had an about page, but it's on basically you got to scroll down and you got to go, okay, where's that at? And you link to it. So it's not necessarily easy per se to find.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, some of the stuff is right on the bottom of the page now, which is, maybe good, maybe not as good as it should be, but at least it's there.
Well, every show has a show description, right?
Yeah.
So when you create a podcast in the PowerPress plugin, I would think you just pull that same description. I don't know if...
Yeah, we could pull that and put it on. We could make that available as a widget.
Yep.
So that it would be on there. That would be easy for people just to drop on their page for the folks that are HTML, I guess for a better word, challenged.
Yeah, as long as it's not too long, right? Yeah. Where it's going to push all your stuff on your right column or left column or whatever.
I think a separate box would be good to make it shorter.
You could use the subtitle for that because iTunes doesn't pay attention to the subtitle really. So how about we put that somewhere?
Yeah. That's a good idea. True. So it's it's stuff like this, talking like this is, I think, if podcasters are listening, this is stuff that you have to think about and use a critical eye. And I'd be honest with you, I steal ideas all the time. I go to someone's website. I'm like, whoa, what is that? That's cool. How can I implement that on my website?
Well, that's how the web was built, right?
Yeah.
It was people sharing ideas and people viewing source and cut and pasting out of people's website and doing the same thing. I know I did that for years to build sites for companies. Wow, that's a cool idea. I'm going to grab that code off their website.
One site that I absolutely love, and this guy's not a podcaster. He's he's a broadcaster. I love the Team Coco site. I love Conan O'Brien. I mean, I really like how his site's lined up. And if you're doing video, his site is, it's right there front and center. Boom, let's go. Yep. And the Epidentity folks are starting to work more on a plugin that's going to be used for video, and that's what you're going to see probably some stuff on some of our sites switch up to is their plugin. There's a lot of stuff in that plugin that could confuse people, but it's a great, they've got it, and I like to see more plugins coming out specifically for podcasters. I think there could be a whole sub business in that alone of people creating good themes. I think simplicity in building a theme and having a theme that's ready to roll instead of having to have it sit on top of. The problem we have is a lot of people, and Daniel, I know you're a fan of Genesis, and that's what I'm using on my site now. The problem is you have to pay for that, and then you have to. Usually, the themes that go on top of that are you have to pay some more. I'd like to see some themes that come out that were just their own framework that do not require some sublayer, and it's relatively easy to manipulate. Something that's nice, clean, fast. Because what will happen is some of these, like Genesis, I think it adds, and I look at loading a lot because of the traffic I get on my website, and I know that framework adds, about that much more to the loading because the server has to do so much more stuff, and it basically slows things down. We've had to implement some professional caching on the server and stuff like that to keep the speed loads up, which is most content creators are not going to worry about that. But when you're dealing with surges in traffic on a website that could exceed maybe 100,000 hits an hour, you have to be prepared for that type of traffic. The last thing you want is someone coming to the website and getting a 404. As your popularity grows, you have to look at that. You have to watch that close.
Daniel, I noticed that you had mentioned that you've been doing some research around using YouTube with podcasting. Why don't you share with us what you found and what your ideas are there?
Yeah, a lot of people see YouTube as this wonderful platform, and it is a wonderful platform for video. And I'm seeing Spreaker, we praised them earlier. They're an awesome service, but I think one of the bad decisions they've made is allowing podcasters or promoting that podcasters just cross-post their audio content onto YouTube. I call that fake video, where you have just a screenshot of something or a super basic slideshow and then audio. I've seen this with my network that we've done a couple tests on some of our shows, and it will initially seem really impressive. Like we have a podcast about the TV show Resurrection, and this was one that we tested this on. Some of the YouTube videos have 22,000 views. And initially that sounds amazing. But Todd, you're probably already thinking this. What does that actually turn into for actual audience size? And what you really have to do is look at your audience retention stats on YouTube, which is a separate section. And I saw with that video, 22,000 views and continuing to rise. In the first 90 seconds, 95% of the audience is gone. Within the first 3 to 5 minutes, an additional 2.5 to 5% of the audience is gone. So 5 minutes in or 10 minutes in, you're working with only 1% or 2.5% of that. And yes, 1% of 22,000 is still a nice number. That's a bigger number than if you didn't publish out there. But I think where this can really hurt you is when you're doing this, and if you do it more than once, this can really hurt you, because what happens is people will find that content. They'll maybe see it featured somewhere. They'll find it in a search result. They'll learn to not play that content because they'll learn, oh, that's the fake video. I don't want to watch a fake video. I want to watch a real video. So people will start, you're basically training people, don't consume my content on YouTube. It would be far better to put out a simple video, even if it's just a teaser for your content. Maybe you spend an hour answering one question in your podcast. Answer that question in 3 minutes in a video on YouTube, and then tell people, visit my podcast to listen to the full description of this. That would be so much more effective and help your brand much more than hurting your brand like posting the fake videos on YouTube.
So what you're saying is actually make a real video, right?
Yeah.
That's maybe like 2 minutes long or something like that as a maximum.
Right.
Is a better way of doing it.
Yeah, 2 to 5 minutes. I see that even talking head video like what we're doing here, and Todd, I'd love to hear what kind of success you're having, but I've been playing with this with the Audacity podcast where I am live streaming it to YouTube.
Yeah.
And so it is just a talking head video. I'm not showing anything. But I am finding even with just simply talking head video, I get 25% watches almost the whole video.
Yep.
There's always going to be a drop off in the first few minutes or first few seconds as people just decide content isn't for me. That's always going to happen. But it's that retention, how many people are sticking in after 5 or 10 minutes.
And I think what I've seen, and sometimes I get lazy. For example, if I don't do, and you guys are watching your return screens, if I'm not switching and changing what is on the screen on a regular basis, then I start, and if I'm just doing a one shot for a long, long time, I lose no matter where I'm at. If I'm doing it on my site or on YouTube, I'm losing audience because they're like, this is boring. And sometimes people really do watch. So you got to keep the visual thing going, making some change ups, bringing stuff up. My YouTube videos, I've always said, and this is, and people say, why should I do video? And there's really just a couple of reasons. One, it makes you a better podcaster by far. I mean, by far. When you got the camera on and you're rolling, you have to be better prepared and you have to go. Just like the other night when I wasn't fully prepared and I started the show, guess what? It shows because you can't edit that out. You go on YouTube and watch that last video and you go, what the heck did he do? Reach over there, and what I was doing was turn the speaker down because I forgot to turn the speaker down on the capture card. And there was a break. And it was, on an audio file, I did. On the audio file, I just clipped that out so that 3 or 4 seconds of dead air right at the beginning was gone. But in a video, you can't do it. So, number one, it makes you a better podcaster. Number two, it gives you just a little different exposure level. In the very beginning, and I did a talk on this at NMS Expo 2 or 3 years ago, I talked about at the beginning of doing video, man, I was really, really disappointed. The numbers really sucked. I mean, it was like 99% audio, 1% video. Now the numbers have shifted where we're probably 20% watches the video programming and 80% listen to audio, which is fine for me. As a matter of fact, it's a good ratio to have. But YouTube for me, because the content is so long, this show and my regular show is so long, it doesn't fit in the psychic of watching on YouTube. But I think your strategy of using a 3-minute show, pointing them back at your main show, probably is a better strategy in the long term if people have time to do that. My show, I don't know if I've got time to do that. I don't know if I've got an extra 15 minutes to run another recording that says, hey, on today's show, we covered this, 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 and this. Go over to this site and get the whole thing. So everyone's show content and what they're doing is going to work for them or against them on YouTube.
Yeah, there are different ideas of where you should be with your podcast. And generally, be everywhere. But I like to add to that to say be everywhere you can be well.
Right.
If you can be on YouTube and actually post those videos, whether they be long or short, but they're real videos, then yes, do that. If you can't, don't worry about it. Try to grow your audience through the many other different ways that you can be in other places you can be well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of our podcasts is actually switching to video. Our Clean Comedy podcast, we've done 200 episodes of audio, and we were realizing that our content was lending itself more toward video. Like we were more often having to tell people, go to the show notes to look at this or to watch this or see this photo that we're talking about. When there are many ideas that we've had, comedy ideas, that we couldn't communicate in audio. So we've had to just put them off. And we announced after 200 episodes, it's the end of our 3rd season. Don't try and figure out the math with that. But after 200 episodes, we're switching to a video show, and it's going to be seasonal to allow us time to produce the videos and ideas. But because I think short form video content that's related to comedy, especially, that's a great platform being on video. And we will do it as a YouTube show as well as a video podcast. I am not giving up on podcasting. I fully believe in podcasting. And so we are going to release it as a video podcast as well as publish on YouTube.
Yeah, I know that the YouTube folks have a program that's trying to support podcasters. I've spoken to them in the past. They're going after big podcasters to take their audio and make it available, and it's kind of like what Spreaker did. That probably is where that's coming from, is the program that YouTube has to work with content publishers to create like still graphics or moving graphics that has the audio that plays in the background. So I think that your stats, Daniel, really reflect how effective that is. But I do know that some podcast shows, and this comes from some experience at Podcast One, if it's a big celebrity, if it's a show that has a huge audience, we have seen really good numbers from that too, especially if it's focused on a particular conversation, or if it was a topic that was hot, or so there are some situations where just putting the audio up there works, and can grow. But you're right, the conversion to that audience into subscribing to your show is a little bit difficult through YouTube, and that's what makes it probably not as long-term effective. But there are shows that are getting a lot of views, or not views but listens on YouTube.
I think it really goes back to the be everywhere type of idea. And I was been so busy. I mean, last year when we were at Podcast Movement, I met this guy that had was building Roku channels, and a relatively good price. And I thought, man, it's time. Maybe it's time with all the shows that we have over at Geek News Central. It's time for our own Roku channel. And I went looking for his website, and I'm like, it's not there anymore. So maybe the price was too good. I don't know. I'm going to reach out to him and find out. But I think there's lots of opportunities to be seen on lots of platforms. I've just ordered an Android TV. Google TV's been essentially discontinued, and it's moving into Android TV. So there's a dozen set-top boxes now, to the point it's almost impossible to keep up with them. But I think audiences are going to be, if you're doing video, you need to be on those types of devices as well. As a way for people to watch your content in a kickback. Daniel, this is what you guys should do with that show of yours. Is it makes sense to, and especially if you're mucking it up and showing props and stuff, that you'll want to have some place where people can kick back. When do I watch comedy shows? Late in the evening, largely because most of them are not child safe. Late in the evening in my living room on my big screen. And if I could watch a comedy show on your comedy show on my big screen, I think that would be good as well. So you have to think about how people are consuming your content too. I'm not necessarily listening to comedy shows in the car on the way to work. It's usually when I want to relax and completely data dump and not have to think. So I think too, you have to think about where and when your audience members are consuming. And I know on my show, they listen to me on the way to work and on the way home. That's where the majority of people listen to my tech show, and it kind of makes sense. They come out of the office, they be like, all right, what's been happening in the world? And they tune up and they listen and say, okay, I'm caught up on the news. And basically when they get home, they don't have to go search the web, the intranets for the content, because I provided it for them. So you really have to think, and I always take it way back to the audience. I try to say, okay, how is this going to affect the audience, plus or minus? Sometimes to the detriment of my own schedule. So, the big push that I've said this year, and I'm going to keep talking about it in every show, is we're trying to get the Android community engaged. And, we've really tried to unify the process and make it easy for content creators to make it easy for the Android folks to subscribe to their podcast. And Robin, I know this is a frustration point for you too. And then I'm going to ask Daniel, what can we do? What do you think, from your perspective, is going to help getting people to subscribe via the Android platform? And this is for Daniel. What kind of ideas do you have on that? Have you put any time thought into that?
Well, it starts by first being in those popular Android apps. What is hard is there are so many options, and you went through this challenge with PowerPress 6. Which one do you actually link to and such with those subscription buttons? But I think the best way, really, for your audience would be if you made some kind of video or a subscription page that tells people, here's how to subscribe. A video would be great where you show them, do this, and that's how you subscribe to it. Or like Ira Glass did this when they were launching cereal. He had his grandmother there, and she described it as visit the website, click play. And if your podcast isn't that easy on a mobile device or a desktop, then you need to work on it some. But then you can promote some kind of subscription option. I think ultimately having your own app might be the easiest thing because more Android users are familiar with installing apps than they are subscribing to podcasts. But I think a lot of it is this ideology of the different platforms. I know Rob Walsh has talked about this on here before, where it just seems like Android users aren't as interested in consuming multimedia content as iOS users are. Some of that might be because of the technology they have accessible to them that's not just as integrated as it is on iOS. And that's where, as podcasters, I think we need to educate people to say, this is how you subscribe to our podcast. And while you're here, check out some other podcasts you might enjoy too. So making it as easy as possible, as upfront as possible, so that anyone could go and not have to worry about understanding what RSS is, but you just say, go here, click on this, and you're subscribed.
Yeah, I think, Daniel, that's definitely true. I think one of the challenges with the Android is that I think it's a different user demographic than a typical Apple user, and if we can make some inroads into growing the Android user base, then that will mean that podcasting has really become more mainstream. So I think we have an educational challenge to let those Android users know that there's content that they may have an interest in. I don't know that it's as much of a issue of accessibility or availability in Android. I think it's just more Android users don't use as much data and they just may not be as inclined to consume multimedia content on their phones because they probably have lesser data plans or those type of things. I think that the challenge is to get those users to realize that there's content in there that they have an interest in, and I think that's the big challenge. And I think a lot of the attention that's come from the media here as of late is, I'm sure, is going to help with some of that. But I also agree that that there needs to be kind of like a go-to platform on Android that can raise some more awareness. I mean, it'd be great if Google had their own podcast platform that they could put in as part of the Play Store or something like that. I think that would increase the visibility of the content in a huge way. I don't know that that's ever going to happen. So I think trying to work through, and I think as we see more of these streaming music platforms come on board, there's probably a lot more users on Android that are using Spotify and using TuneIn and using these other, these other platforms. Now, granted, those users tend to focus more on music, so that may not be the end-all solution either. But I think it's a big challenge that the podcasting space has going forward. How do we get those Android users to realize that there's some great content there?
I think what it takes is a groundswell, too, because, let's be honest, I think the Android folks are more activists than the iPhone users are. I would consider them to be a little more aggressive in protecting their brand. A lot of folks that are on the Android platform would not be caught dead with an Apple product. So I think, if you can get them engaged, figure out who the rallying cry people are, I think it'll help. And I think events like the Podcast Awards is going to help raise awareness as well, which I should mention here, and I snuck that in there. Wasn't that sly?
Yes.
And of course I'm just a consultant for the Podcast Awards. New Media Expo's running it, and right now I think the nominations close on the 6th of February at 23:59, and so nominations are hot and heavy right now. So you've got 6 days left or something like that to nominate your favorite shows. So you get over there and do that. And I see that they picked up a couple of more podcast sponsors as well. So great way to get some exposure, folks. If you're, those banners are going to sit on that website for the next year. I think they kept the same pricing model last year. I think a podcaster can get in for $250 to have a 120 by 120 banner on the website. And you'll definitely not want to miss getting exposure to all the listeners. That's the key thing to remember here, all the listeners that are coming to this website. And I know that the inbound traffic to that website's always really good. So, and we probably should also, Rob, mention, that the New Media Expo, we're a partner with them as a way of disclosure here, a media partner. And we want you to really consider coming out to the New Media Show in April. It's going to be, of course, in conjunction with the NAB show. It's going to be a great event. Get your tickets. Come out and hang out with us. We're going to be doing a super session, and Rob and I will both be there. Daniel, I know you're coming to the show as well. We'll be there as a speaker. I think it's an event not to miss. There's a couple events this year that are going to be great for podcasters. Rob, any thoughts on anything that's been announced by New Media Expo in the last week?
I don't think there's been a lot of announcements that I've noticed, but I think that they're ramping things up. They're booking keynote speakers, and it's gonna be a really interesting event. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it'll be a big moment for the podcasting space, I think, is what's going to happen at that event.
Let's see here, what else? And I'm also thank the folks at New Media Expo. They put our New Media Show a prominent link on the website. So we are now actually, let me actually bring that up. I was surprised they put it in the banner head. I didn't know they were going to do that. So that was a nice gesture by them. But we're right there front and center. So there's no way you can miss and that's an older episode too. We got to get them to update that embed, but so you can get to the New Media Show directly from nmxlive.com too. Right there at the top, you can just boom right in and get in. So
it'd be great if they had our live stream embed as well as an on-demand list. Yeah, past shows. But
I'll have them update that embed that's on their website so that we can maybe they'll let me edit that. I don't know. We'll have to see. So Danny, was there some other topics you wanted to cover today?
Well, I think the podcasting space is awesome. I know that, Rob, with your experience with Podcast One, you're seeing a lot of big names coming into the podcasting space. I have to wonder how sustainable that's going to be, because we've seen big names come in before and then decide, no, podcasting's not working for me, and then they abandon the platform. Mm-hmm. I think we'll kind of continue to see that, maybe especially this year. What are your thoughts there, Rob?
Yeah, I think that, my experience with it has been kind of mixed. I think there's a lot of celebrities that get all excited about it, and they come into it and they start doing a podcast, and the shows fail. And then there's other ones that come into it and actually do a great job. So I think it's a mixed bag. I think it goes both ways. It takes a different kind of talent to engage with an audience via spoken word, and not every celebrity has that ability. A lot of these folks, read scripts. They don't. It's difficult for them to actually speak, off the cuff, and to have an opinion about things, because they're always told what to say. and a lot of them just don't have the kind of personality that connects with an audience. So, I mean, I think a lot of them come into it thinking that they're going to be, hot stuff, and it doesn't always work out. But the ones that connect, they do fantastic, But that's like 10% of all the celebrities that walk in the door actually are successful. So,
do you see any kind of pattern there, like where the celebrities are picking a particular niche to focus on, or are they talking about themselves? What seems to differentiate the successful ones from the unsuccessful?
I think speaking in a way that isn't condescending to their audience, and then also speaking really, in a way that that your audience thinks that you care about them and what they think, and want to engage them, and really, I mean, I think a great example is Steve Austin. I think he has a way of speaking. It's not for everyone, but he has a way of speaking that it's like, he's like, a normal guy. I mean, he just comes across that way, but he's got, a lot of experience, and that's a common theme that I see with a lot of the successful podcasts. I mean, even the Snooki podcasts, she speaks frankly and honestly, and says what she thinks, and people like that. People like people that are genuine and are likable. And I think that's the key to a successful podcast, is not being an egotistical maniac, which is a problem, with a lot of celebrities, is that they get a little caught up on themselves. So I think that's a huge thing that I saw down there. There was a lot of podcasts that got launched and got killed within, just a month or two, because of that.
Even Rob, even me, and I don't want to bring the focus back to me, but I find that I have to refrain at times from talking about stuff. There's stuff, and maybe if my situation was different in the space, I wouldn't have that to talk about. But there's so much stuff that crosses my desk that I'm like, darn, I wish I could really talk about this. And because it's stuff that's bubbling up and I have to hold it in. And I think my audience senses that I can't talk 100% freely. So for those of you that have no business ties to no one, you can you have the freedom to say what you want without having to worry about losing a customer or a client, or pissing off half the certain group of people and so forth. And I think it's constraining. It really is, and it drives me crazy. That's the only thing from a content producer standpoint, is when you start wearing the business hat, and there's certain things you just have to zip up about, and it's that's tough. It really is. And I think, while that's not directly related back to the celebrities, but don't you think those guys live in a bubble, and that bubble protects them, and thus when they have to really connect with the outside world, they're no different in putting their underwear on like we are. They do it the same, and yet they have the same. Well, they're like you said, they're scripted. So when they're off script, you find out who they really are, and maybe they aren't who you thought they are, and maybe that's why those shows aren't successful.
Yep, it's exactly what I've seen, and it's not. It just gets back to being a human being. It gets back to being natural in who you are, and if natural in who you are isn't very compelling to someone, it's not gonna work as a podcast, and maybe you shouldn't be podcasting. So go back to acting, or whatever. I mean,
and maybe that's what it is. Maybe their shows are acting, and the audience can sense that they're acting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just because you're a comedian doesn't make you a successful podcaster. I think that's another thing that I've seen, is that, I mean, you may be able to get up and do a stand-up act. Like, I would love to see Louis C.K. do a podcast, but I really have to wonder how successful he would be as a podcaster. I mean, I know he's capable, but
Well,
I don't know that he would be willing to do what it takes to be successful as a
most
podcaster.
comedians though feed off their audience and they cue
Mhm.
on that, and that's what makes them funny. Is they can use the audience for dramatic pauses and shifts
Yep.
and all that stuff that really makes comedians do what they do the best. So, those folks that can do comedy on a podcast, my God, that's got to be the hardest thing in the world. Like, Daniel, you've been doing it for a while. I just can't imagine.
You have to have a co-host, really. It is so hard to be funny by yourself unless you have it scripted where you're telling a story and assuming that people are probably laughing on the other side.
Right.
It's
Hoping,
tough. That's
right?
why
Yeah.
one of the
Hoping, yeah.
reasons why in my first 2 years of podcasting with my Clean Comedy podcast, I had 9 episodes in 2 years because it was just so much work to try to make sure
Right.
that this was content I thought was funny.
And I laugh at myself half the time. And it's just like the other day making a mistake on my show. I'm just like, what an idiot you are, and I know that the longtime listeners in my audience were just like, geez, Todd. But at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, what if it's a new listener? They're going to say, listen to this bozo, I'm out of here, but they don't know, they don't have that relationship. So, I would expect that show not to gain very many new listeners.
That's where you can hope that you have a lot of really good iTunes reviews that they can read and see,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I guess this was just an off day for him.
It was a one-off. I don't, be honest with you, I have never worried about the iTunes reviews. I don't think people discover shows on iTunes. They don't. They discover shows via Google, and they find you through word of mouth, and it's what it goes back to a topic drives me crazy. Oh, I'm a new and noteworthy, woohoo! And I'm like, please stop. And I think they very quickly realized that the new and noteworthy on Google, while it's cool and it's nice to brag about, probably didn't equal to very much ramp up in their show.
Well, where podcast reviews do help, and this is why I created mypodcastreviews.com that sends people all of their reviews so that they can get more reviews. But where it does help is in the long term. When you look at a particular topic in iTunes, you search for it, like, for example, Once Upon a Time in iTunes, and you decide, I want to find content, or I want to find Once Upon a Time in iTunes. The shows that appear higher are the shows that have more ratings and reviews. So having more ratings and reviews means you'll show up higher to people who are searching for that related content. So that is something that it's a long term. It's not like new and noteworthy, woohoo, I'm featured by iTunes again, or something like that. But it's a longer play to make yourself more visible. And then as people might be looking at 2 different shows, they see this one has 500 reviews. This one has 10.
Right.
I think I'll go where everyone else is going.
Yeah, I guess my show discovery's never been focused on that. So, because I keep, and not to say that you're wrong at all. I'm not saying that, but I keep telling people there is life after iTunes.
Yeah. Well, and just being featured in new and noteworthy doesn't guarantee that you're going to see a big spike in your listener base. Because I mean, I've been submitting shows to the iTunes folks for years now for new and noteworthy, and some shows will hit and do well there, and other ones will just flop. So there's no consistent pattern that I've seen of success of getting into the new and noteworthy area. I think it's always good to try and make that happen if you can. A lot of podcasters, I don't think really have any pull to get that done. Unless it happens kind of, naturally through the submissions process, but it's no guarantee that you're going to grow your audience. It may grow it temporarily, but it's only going to be for a week, and then you're going to be back to, growing it the way you should have always been trying to grow your show.
Yeah, that's where you have to have sustained good content that people want to consume and commit to by subscribing to it.
Yep.
Well, I wanted to let everyone know, too, on upcoming programming schedules. Next Saturday, we're off. It's my fault. I'm going to be heading to the Windy City for our annual Raw Voice Retreat, where we lay out our basically roadmap of what we're going to do throughout 2015. We got a couple of 2014 items to close, so that definitely is still already at the top of the list. and we're getting very, very close to launching, or I'm basically bringing on some new products on Blueberry.com, which I'm excited about. And then the following weekend, Rob, we may have to shift. So I'm being asked to come to California, and so the weekend. Well, maybe let me look at this calendar here. Oh no, we can do a show on the 14th. There's gonna be no problem for that. That's on Valentine's Day.
Yep.
And then the 21st is going to be the challenge. We may want to shift that show to the 22nd if we can. I don't want to miss very many episodes, but I'll probably be flying back on the 21st from California. So if we can do the show on Sunday, if that works in your schedule, you can find a guest. That would be good.
Okay.
I think any specific news has come out this past week that we should cover before we get out of here? I know there was an article on Wired that was another puff piece. What did you think about that particular article, Rob?
Yeah, I didn't see that article. I saw one in Forbes that I thought was
maybe
really
it was Forbes.
A sign that there's still a lot of people, or a lot of journalists more specifically, that don't really do their research and don't really, I mean, it was almost like this person just kind of wrote kind of what you would expect in a podcast article, right? And didn't really do any deep research around it. I mean, I think it's always good, having articles like that come out, but it's almost like I've noticed here over the last month or so that there's been a lot of, articles still talking about cereal, and it's like, okay.
It's over.
Well, I guess there's talk right now of season 2 of Serial coming out. So I'm not sure when that would happen, but I would imagine that there's a lot of pressure for them to keep that going.
Yeah, and I know, Daniel, you do seasons. Yeah, it just goes to show you that I think the season thing, I'm not a big fan.
Let me correct you on that. I'm going to do seasons. Okay. I've not done it up until now. I'm about to, so my experience might be, this doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm just not a big fan of seasons because, and I guess it relates to the content. It's like you give your audience, let's say 12, 13 episodes, and then you bounce out for 2 months. And I'm like, why kill that momentum? Why just absolutely destroy the momentum you've had? And because I've always said podcast listeners build you into their lives. And as soon as you quit creating content, they're going to go find some content another place. And they may not be as trusting with their time with you to follow on. And I know this is hard for people to hear this, but why do radio people don't do seasons? They do it year round. Now they take time off, and they have co-hosts that come in and step in for them. But there's a reason for that, because the listeners don't go away just because you want to take 2 months off. So,
but you know who does do seasons and succeeds with it? Television, entertainment.
Yeah.
I think that entertaining content does lend itself more towards seasons, especially since a lot of that takes time to produce. So you have to have seasons.
Yeah. I mean, Todd, I think that there's reasons for doing it.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's as successful of a strategy and an approach, I think is really, really where the question gets in. I tend to agree with you that consistent content builds an audience over time, but there are economic and production reasons or other reasons why people like to do seasons. I know I've seen it where, like maybe a producer creates, season 1, and then they go off and create a new podcast,
right?
A completely new podcast, and then they'll come back and do a second season of this other show. But yeah, there's a huge drop off in subscribers when you stop producing content. I mean, it happens just in not doing an episode for 2 weeks.
Right.
So you're going to lose audience, but it also gets back to how loyal that fan base is for you as a content producer. If you start producing again, then they may rejoin you, but it may also be a problem for you to reach them and let them know unless you've built an email list or something like that of all your listeners.
Yep. Which is always a good idea.
Yep.
But you're only going to get a percentage, 2-3% maybe of your listeners are going to sign up for the newsletter. Maybe a percent.
Unless you have a good enough incentive for them to.
Yeah.
Amazed right now. I have, I think about 75% of my audience signed up for my email list because I've given them reasons to. Here and there, I'll release an episode where I say, if you want the resources that I mentioned here, download this free PDF, sign up for my email newsletter, and you can download this free PDF. When I've started doing that, I saw my email list jump huge amounts. Like I started at the beginning of 2014, I think my email list was maybe 300 people. And by the end of 2014, I think I was breaking through 1,500. And that's because of my different approach to the email list. So now I have, at this point, probably about 75% of my email list also, or I mean 75% of my podcast listeners also are subscribed to my email list. If not, it's bringing podcast listeners from my email list.
But it's also, another thing I look at it too is you can do that. I can't. I create content. I don't have a product I'm selling. So, there is no extra incentive. The incentive that I give to the folks that donate to my show, they get a little extra access behind the scenes, but most of them don't take advantage of it. So, it is an interesting thing. It depends on your objectives too. So, but I think for the average guy, the average show, because most people are not doing what you're doing. Not to say that they shouldn't, but most aren't. So, it's an interesting. It's probably I'm sure you've created a whole topic on that topic alone.
Yeah.
How to build your email list, but there's 25 different ways to skin the cat. That's the beautiful thing about this space.
Yeah.
But we're almost here. Actually, we are here at the end of the hour and a half. And I want to remind folks to subscribe to this show. If you're not already, please do. And if you want to watch the video, it's available on YouTube or on the website at newmediashow.com. Of course, we remind you to join us at the New Media Expo in Las Vegas in April. It's going to be a great event. I hope that you'll come out. And I'll be there. Rob will be there. Of course, most of the podcasting community is large that will be there. You'll get to meet people that you've listened to and lots of good information and sessions. I haven't seen the full session list yet, but should be some good topics to be able to hang out in. It's going to be interesting to see how at the New Media Expo, how many people are attending the sessions with the distraction of NAB and the enormity of it being right beside New Media Expo. Do you think it's going to affect the session levels, Rob?
I don't know. I'm hoping that it will have the opposite effect of actually having more people in the sessions because there's more people at the event.
Do the NAB people get access to the...
Yeah, they do.
Oh, that's curious.
Yeah, that's my understanding anyway, is that, if you have a pass to the National Association of Broadcasters event, that you can get into the New Media Expo sessions. So there's going to be a lot more people to pull from into those sessions. So I'm expecting a lot more people to be in those sessions than what we've typically seen in the past.
And another thing, too, is that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is going to be the day of the session. So Monday is going to be your day to get out and see the show. So one thing that you're going to want to do, don't get into Vegas on Saturday or Sunday and party all night. You're going to want to be prepared to hit the floor running Monday because there is a lot to see and not a lot of time to see it if you're planning on going to a lot of the sessions on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So don't, plan accordingly. It is a monster show, and there's a lot to see. And for those that have never been to a trade show where the entire convention center is full end to end, in every wing and every floor and every hallway, this is what NAB is all about. Daniel, you went to CES, a little less on the vendor side, but it's almost the same number of vendors. Had you been to NAB before? You didn't go to NAB, did you?
No, I've never been to NAB. This will be my first time. I'm really looking forward to it because I really enjoyed CES, working with you and the Tech Podcast Network team.
Yeah.
And I'll be doing something kind of like that, at least the floor interviews at NAB, and I'm really looking forward to that because that's my niche, podcasting gear and broadcast gear and technology.
But you understand the enormity of the time-space continuum thing, and I just can't reiterate that enough. People need to really plan. If you don't, you're going to get there and go. Oh, you're going to be you're going to be overwhelmed. Am I right or wrong on that?
Yeah, totally right.
Yeah.
So, start your planning now. You can look at the exhibitor list, you can go through and map where you're going to walk to and what you're going to avoid or maybe just skim. It's huge. It's a huge show. And book your appointments if you want to talk with specific companies early as possible. And I guarantee you that most of those exhibitors are taking appointments already. And, plan on being in and out of those booths in 15 minutes. If you don't make a booking, you're going to stand there an hour because they're going to be slammed. 100,000 people are going to be on that show floor and you're elbow to elbow. So, well, Rob, any ideas for next week?
Not at this point, but we will let everybody know.
Okay. And for everyone that's been watching, I want to thank you for being here. Thanks, Daniel, for coming on. Daniel, where can they find you?
TheAudacityToPodcast.com. That links to everything of mine, like my SEO for Podcasters course, my podcast reviews, and all the other products and services I create, and the free content I create to help you launch and improve your podcast. That's it. TheAudacityToPodcast.com. And I'm on Twitter at TheRamenNoodle.
And Rob?
I'm at robgreenlee.com and on Twitter at robgreenlee.
And, of course, I'm at Geek News on Twitter, and you can reach Rob or I both here at Todd or Rob at newmediashow.com. You can drop us an email, and we'll reply to it and actually talk about it in the show as we did last time. We want to thank Mike for his questions. This time it was good amount of data that we'd be able to clear some of that for you today. And for everyone else, thanks for being here. We'll see you a week. Actually, I almost made it a week from Saturday.
Yep, the 14th.
The 14th on Valentine's Day. And we'll have a great show for you. But until then, everyone take care. We thank you for being here at the New Media Show. Aloha.
Bye-bye.